Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm April Weitkamp. I am a life skills teacher here in Everett. Today, we're going to be talking about writing. And I did writing one way, and I facilitated a class this summer, and it's it's caused all sorts of cognitive dissonance and changes for myself as well and how I do things. So this is kind of an old and new presentation because I'm sharing some of the things that I've done in the past, and then I'm going to be sharing some of the new things that we're working on in our classroom. And I'm going to give a shout out to Jessica and Susan and Irene and Olivia for holding down the fort and tolerating me getting all this together. That would be the classroom staff. So, okay, here we go. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. We are going to look at tools and tricks to help kids write at every level. Ideas for coaching. I've been doing some coaching at the district level off and on with early learning, our early learning department, which was who adopted the curriculum that I've adapted. And then goals for writing that can be used for your IEPs. All things that I find helpful when doing this work. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of information about my program. This is my 16th year in Everett. I did a 3 through 5 for 6 years at another school, and this has been my 10th year here at Jefferson. Our goal, and I say goal like that because we can go over, but our goal size is 10. We have a contracted 2 classroom paraeducators plus dedicated one-on-ones. I have an SLP and a PT who embed for a lot of their instruction in the classroom. Right now I have K through 4. Our district is moving back to a primary split model, primary intermediate split model, which I'm very excited about. And when people come in, the first thing that they will see is we do a lot of embedded communication in the classroom. It's a major focus of everything that we do. And the thing that I always like to say is communication is writing and writing is communication. Our kids have alternative ways of communicating. So they are all very complex communicators. You could come in and you would see POD, which I did not bring mine. I apologize, a pragmatic, organized, dynamic display. I use a group 1, and then all of the kids have one that they have access to as well. I have one student who is using touch chat on a dedicated device, and another couple that were semi-trialing. I have another student who's working on Proloquo through Providence. And then I've been using core vocabulary for quite a while now within the classroom. We implemented adapting it, put it together and taught it. And now that I have a new crew and things are finally stabilizing a little bit, we're going to be going back to actively teaching how to use core vocabulary beyond what we've been doing since school started. Okay, so this is my goal for the next 50 minutes for you guys. If you want to derail me and ask questions, that's cool. Sometimes I go over, sometimes I run out of time. We're going to look at how we teach writing in the program and the changes that I've made, plus how COVID affected the changes that we've done. Talk about the stages and steps that we've developed, how I teach my staff, how to do it with the kids. I've got some ideas and some tools, some good examples of former student writing, and then answer your questions. So, and again, if you have them along the way, don't worry about forgetting or interrupting. You can put them in the chat. And if I miss them, Sarah will catch them. Okay, so this was me. You see this guy over here? This was me for like the first month and a half of school. We were all done. We were beat, we were tired, and we were feeling very defeated. I got 7 new kids in a year. That is a lot for a life skills classroom. And 6 of my 9 students hadn't been in school for a year and a half. They were also a different group than I had had previously. The previous class that I had, I had 4 that left me at the end of this last year. And they were in a very different place with their literacy and their communication. And I had done this phenomenal PD course this summer. And I spent all summer with these grand ideas in my head of what I was going to do when I got back. And I came to realize that, oh, they're gone. So I have to figure out what I'm going to do next. My new students have a massive amount of potential. I just have to get them to where I want them to be. And so part of what we've been doing this fall is helping build some foundational skills of how to be a learner, and then taking a look at what we have been doing, where our kids are, and how we're going to get them to the next step. So that's where I'm saying that they've been missing foundational literacy and they're missing communication. Being at home is not the same as being at school, where we have the staff that can dedicate to that. And honestly, COVID threw our families and our kids in for, a world of complexities that we're still going to be digging out of for a long time. And yeah, we're learning how to be learners. We're up to about a half a day that can be really, really awesome. And I love it every day. And then when it goes sideways, you know, we start again the next day. But we're baby stepping. And I'm going to go with what we're going to do. Okay. So the basis of the work is this big line right here. And it's actually the second one, presumed competence. And I get a little emotional. My kids are phenomenal and they are tremendously intelligent and they have skills that they cannot demonstrate to people. When you walk in my classroom, and the expectation of everybody that I have work with my students is my kids can do it. My job and my staff's job is to provide them the tools to do it. They have much more in there than a lot of people will give them credit for. So there's that. I will then push them. And I am sometimes fun. I am often the hardcore one in the classroom, and I assume a lot and I teach the kids hard things, but I know they can do it. So the basis for the work is grounded in the Building Foundations That Last, which is Dave Madison writing. Everett Public Schools had adopted it years ago, and they were doing it K2. Just this last year, they decided to transition it up through K3. I have never gone beyond like middle of first grade in the writing that I do with my students. I had gone from the beginning stages all the way up until what we would call a two-part beginning and end story with a change in emotion. And that was just a couple of the girls that I was working with just prior to March of 2020 when schools closed. So, and we did do some writing even in the enclosure and when I taught virtually, but that's kind of where we are. This year, my focus has changed a little bit, and I alluded to that with Michelle Hopstead. There's a shout out at the bottom here. With Michelle Hopstead, Bernadette Nguyen, and Barb Lark, I facilitated a course on comprehensive literacy for all. And if you have not yet read it, I highly suggest that you do. Those are not the kind of books that I tend to enjoy reading, but it was a game changer for me. It had a tremendous amount of research-based best practice information in it, and it really helped shift my thinking. And I'll explain a little of how we did the course and share a little bit of the information, and it was phenomenal. And it's really helped with some of the holes I felt we had between what we were doing for literacy and what we were doing for writing using the district curriculum. And I have some new things to show that are pretty darn cool that I have enjoyed tremendously. And I hope you do. Okay, so where we started, we don't know how to make a choice in my class yet, for the most part. I have a couple of kids that do, so we're learning how to make a choice. We're learning the question of the day. Recently, my major focus has been, can you answer a question, yes or no? If any of you are familiar with POD, that's a big consideration in whether you know, for kids when you're using that particular communication system. Can you make a choice of what you want to eat? Can you tell me a yes or no? Can you help me choose the order of your activities that you're going to do? On top of that, we started learning and sequencing the letters. Well, we started learning our letters. We did letter of the day and we sang songs about letters. We also, you know, would then have the list of all of the kids' names on the board, and we would go up and we would circle all of the times we found those letters as common letters. We are learning to sequence the letters in our name with a model and without a model based on where the kids are. And for my kids that I'd had previously, which is just down to one now, the level of expectation has been much higher within that instructional sequence. So I scaffold everything with the accommodations each child needs to meet it where they are within the levels for those activities. For our beginning literacy focus, we decorated and built our own book boxes. We read books, we're practicing writing lists, we're doing pattern chart writing, which has been so fantastic. Free writing, exploring some phonics, new things. I'm still learning and still bringing in new things. Literacy is writing. I mean, you read and you write. So I'm looking at more as ELA, but so much of it is all so interconnected that if it sounds like I'm talking about writing, I am, and I'm talking about reading at the same time, if that makes sense. Hop-on approach. Previously, I had been doing hand-over-hand assists for drawings, and my kids were okay with it. If I had a child who really didn't like it, we found alternative methods. And I know motorically drawing and writing is really, really challenging for the kids. One of the things I learned this summer was rather than forcing the kid's hand to do something, I hold the pen and the child hops on top. So they get the motion and they get the feel of how to do it. And that's where we've started with drawing our pictures. Interestingly enough, this group of children that I have now did not show a lot of interest in some of the writing activities. But when we started drawing pictures of people, boy, did they like it. They really started getting into it. And it goes to show you don't know until you try some of this stuff, what's going to work and what isn't. My dot here, my bullet point here about taking photos of the students. I know people hesitate to take those on their phones. Dedicate a separate camera, buy a camera. This was something that I learned this summer in the class, but also that we had been doing previously. We did a focus on writing personal narratives. I've also done opinion writing, but the majority of what we wrote was personal narratives. Kids have to have context to write about themselves. And so often our kids with these complex communication needs cannot tell us what they did at home. They cannot tell us what they had for dinner. I've had some that could. This particular group does not. And I've had ones in the past that couldn't. And I'd ask parents for pictures, but getting them was always a little bit complicated. The reason we take photos on our phones or use a camera to take them is we upload them and print them. And those are what we use for our personal narratives. I'll get to the organization and how we utilize that in a bit, but it's really important, especially if you're doing fun activities or even daily things. You'd be surprised what the kids find meaning in, and it's not always what you want to pick. It's so funny how we often find ourselves putting words in our students' mouths. I've learned a long time ago that I probably shouldn't do that because they would communicate something to me or do something, and then I'd find out that they were right and I was really wrong. But it's a good reminder. And the photos are part of the groundwork for doing the personal narrative writing and some of the things that we do. Now, our next step, because we just started narratives, I know it's December, we've been getting there. We just started the narratives, is alternative pencils. And it happens to be the one thing I forgot today. I do have an image of it in my Google Drive. And if you look it up, alternative pencils are all over the web. There's all sorts of resources on it. So you can look them up. I can show you the example that I have and that I use with the students. But right now, and actually just this last week, we did our very first personal narrative. And it was a little different than the previous ones. I simply, I'm pulling out my yellow book. You guys will see this in another one. All I did was write the sentence. And this is mine from that day because I wrote mine first. I wrote, I am April. And I drew a picture of myself inside. And I'll explain the components of why and how that is the way it is, but we just did that last week and the kids actually really liked it. It was fantastic. And now they have their own writing books. So that's where we are as of the first week of December. Okay, building foundations. I'm going to go a little more in depth into this. We began with personal narratives. And the personal narratives, I am going to stop sharing here for a second and minimize all of you so that I can, Maddie, look at your cool stuff you've got there. It's your screensaver, so that I can find my examples, because I'm going to scroll through these for you guys and show you what I have. I'm not going to do the opinion right yet. I'm going to start with a narrative. Okay, so again, please remember I got permission to show these to you. I'm not showing you something I'm not supposed to be. Okay, so this was written, as you can see, in September of 2019. At that time, this young lady was in 3rd grade. She'd been with me since 1st grade. She had a dedicated student device with touch chat because she was on 40 cell, and she was working to combine, and this was before we had moved her to beginning and end two-part stories. So this will be a typical picture. This was one of her favorite things to do outside, was to pick plants and to play in the dirt. So these were the photos. So what we do when we write is we get out our yellow book, and inside our yellow book we have our yellow card. Stop sharing for a second. You guys will better understand that. We have our yellow card. This is part of the Dave Madison curriculum. On the back, I have the letters of the alphabet and phonetic sounds. On the front, I have the question components that you use to tell your personal narrative. I have taken my core vocabulary PCS symbols and put them right on this card, because one of the activities that we do in the classroom is we teach WH words, and we teach how to navigate to find them in our systems. So that when somebody says what, the kids know that what is a thing or an action. If somebody says where, they know where is a place. because what we do is we take our photographs that we have and we use that for the basis. When it's writing time, the staff goes and gets the yellow notebooks. Everybody has one. The kids can do a self-portrait right here. And inside they have their benchmarks. You'll see the benchmarks I designed. They have their yellow card. They have their photographs. And on their benchmark page, their IEP goals are written so that the staff can then know exactly what components they need to be hitting within the personal narrative as we're writing it that day. Okay, so we get out our books, we do all of the things, we prep. You're going to also need for when I do this work, we have to have crayons and a pencil. So those are the components that we would have. And if it was writing day, the staff would literally grab everything and start setting it up while I told my story. Because what would happen is I would have a color-coded storyboard, just a context specific for the story that I wanted to tell. And the kids all know my children, they all know my husband, and they see photographs because it is the most meaningful thing for them to see. And I'll tell a story about myself. Most often I try and do something that I know the kids would like. Right now in December would be time when I, share about going and getting a Christmas tree and hanging it in my house. But I will tell my story, and I have a storyboard that I will show you. I use the Fitzgerald color coding key, and I'll tell my story. I'll draw my picture. While I'm doing that, the staff is prepping all the materials. Whatever storyboard I use, I also provide copies for them, because if the kids just want to retell my story, that is developmentally appropriate and perfectly okay for them to do. So this is a day that my girl chose these pictures, and she got to choose both because in one she was looking at the camera and in one she was not. I'm going to scroll up here. So using her iPad, she chose the pic. She went into her iPad. She went to nature, because if you guys know Touch Chat, she went to group. She went to nature. She said flowers, plants. She went to describing words and picked happy. She went to actions and picked dirt. She went to happy again and school, and then said recess. Like I told you, this is this girl's favorite activity to do, because they were giving some prompts for the questions, but not a whole lot. And the fact that she picked happy twice is a big one for her. So here's what she produced in that. Now, my rules are, if you're outside, you show outside with a sun or clouds and a tree. And everything that we draw is a very simple shape. A great time filler activity that I often do with my students when we need a moment is we'll do a following directions drawing activity. I did these even in COVID. Look at my tree. It's just a triangle and a rectangle. Our goal is not to add a lot of detail to the drawings, but to definitely make it something that the kids can participate in doing. In past years, I'd also tried to use pre-cut shapes. It was really hard to manage all this stuff. If you're daring and you want to, use pre-cut shapes. Yellow rectangles, 2 wheels, you've got a bus. Some triangles and some rectangles, you've got trees. If you want to try that method, I've seen it, people make it work. It didn't work for my group, but I had suggested it. So here you have a cloud, you have the sun, and you have my girl. She did not pick up a pencil when she started with us. And this is an independent drawing. And I love how she colored her hands a different color because she was playing in the dirt. She's got a flower. She's got the grass. And what the staff did is they took all those words that she had said in her iPad and they wrote them out, and they gave her several different options to choose to write the sentences, and the kids got to pick which sentence they liked the best to tell their story. So she did not put the sentences together at this point, but what she did was she produced all the language about herself and the context of what was used for her to tell a story about what she was doing in that photograph. And she drew all the pictures for it. She wrote a story about herself picking flowers at recess. And I love it. Okay, so as you can see, this one is in 2015. We have in our books 2 sections here. One whole side staff used for notes, and that's where they glue the picture and then they date the entry. I'm the worst about writing accurate notes in the books. My ladies do a phenomenal job, but I don't. So this is one I did. This particular child at this time had gotten a pod, and he was really, really doing well with it. He, like it says here, he turned to activities and he pointed to story. He was a big fan of books. I turned to places because if you know, Pods are partner assisted navigation. So the children don't have to do the turning of the pages. They just have to help with the selection of the images. He pointed to daycare, and then we went to animals, and he pointed to an eagle, and then he went ha at me and tried to make a bird noise. That was pretty big because that guy would, just usually make a happy sound or yell at me. He was pretty apraxic. And then if I asked if that was his story, was that he was at daycare, there was a book and it had a bird in it, and he jumped up and down in his chair and got really excited because that was what he was trying to tell me. So then here is his drawing, and this was a hand over hand. He really wanted to help me with drawing himself, and so he did help me with that part. I'm not sure that that's, oh yeah, I think they got something on there. So here he is. The components that we always have in the story, there's always a stick figure person. You always label it me with a pencil. We try and show the emotion in a color because it highlights the feeling. And then we draw what they were doing in the book. And then for this guy, it's interesting because he used some different things. I didn't build a whole sentence because at this point he wasn't ready for me to go that far with him. So I wrote daycare story, eagle, vet. He was insistent upon a vet, and I wasn't going to take words out of his story because it's his story to tell, not mine, even if it didn't make total sense to me. And I said that he made noises like an eagle. And then he used a virtual pencil to do the H, and then on the yellow on his core, he said yes, no, yes. And then he had a virtual pencil and he did GUL, which is why I think he was actually talking about a seagull and making that noise. But if he chose the eagle in the pod, that was the one I was going to go with. But he told a story, and we got it all in writing. So super cool. Okay, so this guy, again, came to me as a first grader, no communication. What year was this? He's in high school now, so he was at this point using touch chat in a system. I mean, one of the last days in my class as a fifth grader, he got into his iPad and he told me, Miss April, I want a fish sandwich, please. I almost drove to go get him one at that point. But looking at the picture, which there wasn't a photograph of this one, he insisted he didn't need one that day and he had something he wanted to tell the staff. So we had a storyboard that I had used that day also. He said, watch movie, eat popcorn, drink soda. And those were on the communication board that I had. And then when he was asked who, you can see he wrote Mom, Dad, Nathan in his iPad, because we do program them for family. Where he said home, what he said Sesame Street, and feelings he said happy. This guy was pretty resistant to holding pens and pencils and crayons, and so he let somebody else do the drawing. If the kids aren't ready to do the drawing themselves, what we do after this is we give them a crayon and we let them go to town on it because it's still theirs. And they need to be able to mark their art and their writing and their drawing however they choose. So here we go. Oh, and this is literally the week before COVID. And this guy had a breakthrough in writing that week. We had been doing writing every week. The gentleman in the picture is his former one-on-one, and he gave me permission for this also. This guy every week watched me come over and do my personal narratives with him, and he would look at me like I was a little bit bananas because he was new to us that year. And I would come over and sit with him every time, and I would tell him these stories, and I would help him with photographs. And this one, when we got there, I think both Nathan and I, our mouths fell open because what he did this day meant, oh, he's got it. He's figured it out, and the whole world closed down. And I still mourn that, but it was fantastic to see where he was. So this was our school fun run. And we are not restraining him. We are walking him so that he is remaining safe in all environments. We were out there with half the school at the time doing laps under our covered area for the school fun run. He had to this point, like I said, not done any of the work independently. He was watching me, and I would ask him if he wanted to help. But if he told me no, it was safer if we did not make him. So he would just watch me do the work. He did the independent drawing, and I had told him he needed to fix it. And he started fixing my drawings this time too. So if it says describing 2 prompts, that means I had to go 2 prompts into describing words to have him choose a feeling. And I would say if I went to groups and then music, that was because there was music playing. So I'm doing some of the navigating in his iPad. But we had to cover the word football because he was obsessed with going outside and playing football with his para. So we covered the football, and then after 2 prompts, he could say playground for where. But this was the first time he had actually started looking at the pictures because he chose the photos. This was the first time he looked at those photos and tried to start telling me about what went on in those pictures. And this was his drawing. And this is where it got super cool because he did all of the drawing himself. And when I told him that's getting too big, he tried to fix it. And so he went back and he missed my leg. So he wanted my leg to go out. So he did a second one on it. And he drew his tree and he drew the sun and he drew us, if you look, in the same sequence we are in the photographs, because I was on one side and then him and then Nathan was on the other side. And he told us he was happy at the fun run. He wanted to talk about the music, but he didn't want to put it in the sentence. And then we didn't do it this day, but he discovered that he loved the virtual pencil. And he would point to a letter and I would write it. And he started to go and I could see some patterns developing in what he was asking me to write. And there were a few times he'd reach over and he'd touch my hand and he'd move it to tell me when he wanted me to go to that next line. And so that was a really phenomenal way for me to know that he felt great ownership in choosing the letters and me writing them, because that he was not ready for that portion of writing below the line. But having somebody do that was tremendously meaningful for him. All right, this is the last one. And this little boy is not covered because that's my son. And it's so funny because it's an old picture. Oh, and now we're not looking at it anymore. This is my son, Lucas. He's old now, but he used to come in and work with the kids in the classroom on a day off, or before and after school, right at the end when he went to school here for a year. So this is a kiddo who, again, did not have a form of communication when he came to us, and he left with both Pod and an iPad. This guy once told me, Grandma, 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 for a half a day. I was like, buddy, Grandma's not here. Grandma was here. I had to learn to stop trying to tell him what was going on in his life. So he chose this picture, and then he turned around to where Brown Bear was stored on the shelf. And then he pointed to love, he pointed to dog, he pointed to bear. He was all about talking about this particular picture. He loves the story Brown Bear, Brown Bear. So I was not surprised that he chose this. But it was so phenomenal how engaged he was in the process of telling us the words that he wanted in the story. And then he did work hand over hand. And it wasn't even Liam, it was Lucas in that photo. So I didn't cover that. But we chose, and then this particular staff member underlined the words that he had chosen from his pod. And then he also chose all of these letters that you see here from the alternative pencil. The alternative pencil, and the idea is the kids might not have the motor skills to write, but it doesn't mean they can't do that same imaginative writing that you see little kids do, where they, I'm writing. My daughter does it now, where she's writing it. She's doing either letters or she's doing squiggles, kind of like when they get the computer and they type like the grown-ups do. Same idea, but we're cutting out motoric challenge involved. All right, so those are some examples. Now I'm going to go back and I'll explain a little bit more about the writing for you.
I love your examples, April. I'm just gonna see if there's any questions.
Yeah, it's a lot at once.
Yeah, it's great. The examples are really helpful. There have been a few questions about how to get the materials, because the David Madison. So we
there is a store up in Bellingham that sells the David Madison stuff. Actually, Barb was texting me. She found it. I'll see if I can find it in my phone while we're talking.
Okay, and then there was also a link we put in the chat, but if there's something kind of local, that's good too.
No, there's a store up in Bellingham that actually sells, it's called Launching Success. It's a toy store in Bellingham. Their website is launchingsuccess.com. They have the yellow books and the yellow cards. The context specific communication boards, I always make those. I just use Boardmaker and put them together myself. I can show you the Fitzgerald color coding key if it's important for you. But I just build them. It doesn't take me very long once you know Boardmaker pretty well. No, it's not called Lakeshore Learning. It's called Launching Success.
It's actually the link I put in there.
Is it? Okay, so she must.
I didn't know it was. I didn't know it was a local company though. So I'll post it again. Great.
They sell it in small packs, and I think what Barb told me was that it does. There's a lot of homeschool families in the area. So that's where you can buy the yellow book and the yellow card. I went through the full Dave Madison training for the 3-day training the school district put together. And then actually years ago, I keep referring to Barb. She was the speech therapist that I learned how to do all this and adapted it with years ago. She and I went to the district and asked, because they trained the speech therapists and the physical and occupational therapists, but they didn't train the life skills teachers. and we were a little upset. Well, we were a lot upset, but we asked and proved what our kids were doing with writing. And so I got to go through the training, and then we were lucky enough to be involved in some of the teaching channel work that the school district did soon after that. And I was able to record some of my lessons and share them with Dave, because part of the ongoing training was he would come to classrooms and teach, and my classroom was not conducive to that. So I taught a lesson and we recorded it with permission, and then we reviewed how it looked and how it was working with the curriculum and the way that he talks about, you know, using challenging language and in a rich environment of literacy and literature available to the children. So we did a lot of work around that. And actually, even just, well, about a month before we closed for COVID, I had a bunch of life skills and developmental kindergarten teachers come in my classroom and watch me teach the writing live. And they were due to come back for another session just when everything closed down. So I always try to make it so that, you know, if something that I'm doing can help others figure out how to do it, I will absolutely do everything in my power to do so. Were there any other questions, Sari, that I missed? Because I got going on examples.
No, but if anybody has them, let us know.
Yeah, pop. Okay, so I will go back and show you the opinion writing in a minute, but I showed you some personal narratives. So that's where I told you, you know, you pick this up, everything's all in it. And I'll talk about my benchmarks in a few minutes. You know, I went through the training. I don't do this the way everybody else does. And even when I was going through my old examples, I've done this in multiple different ways. It used to be that I had the storyboard and I'd let the kids cut out the PCS images from my storyboard to glue them below the line to tell the story. It changes depending upon the kids and their needs. You know, I went so far as a beginning and end and a change in feeling and 2-sentence requirements for a couple of my ladies that had been around for a while and were pretty strong communicators and writers. So like I said, we'll go back to the opinion writing. So I'll skip that second bullet point. The how was with Barb. We took that district training. We took a look at what we thought we could do with our kids. And I said, you know, we tried to use shapes that were pre-cut so we didn't have to have the kids do the drawing. But I always go back to that. The kids are competent and they can learn it. I mean, that first drawing that you saw of the young lady outside playing, her windows are always round, but I don't care because they're her windows and they look like a window because she puts the cross through them. It's independent, it's hers. It's her putting her picture and her words on the page. And that's what I really want for the kids. I don't want to put words in their mouth. I don't want to draw what they want. I want them to draw it. So as close as they can get to doing it. And I have some that will ask me for help. I have others who want to, you know, do all the layers and the crayons and all the details. And so there is a balance because the detail is not in the drawing, the detail is in the writing. And I said this, we did collaborate with the early literacy department to train and share the information with others. I've gone to do it with DK, and I'll bring all my tools with me when I go. I bring my pod and I talk about how it's so important that I'm modeling the communication as I teach. So when I teach lessons, I teach using the pod. I also pull the kids' iPads and I'll model things within their iPads. And then I'll flip back and forth between the core vocabulary because it's posted all over the room and it's on all the kids' desks as well. Worked with the early literacy before COVID. During, I actually did some training on, we had asynchronous Wednesdays, and there are some of the group that didn't get to finish. I did some training on our asynchronous Wednesdays, so when they came back to school, they could potentially start it, and then coming up here again in January. One of the cool opportunities we had at that point before and during COVID was one of the people that worked in the early literacy department was actually a former SLP. And she'd been pod trained and she knew what we were doing. So it was one of her big goals to get as many people in that had kids that needed alternative access and had the more complex communication needs to see how it worked. Then I said my method and the adaptations and modifications change as the kids do. I didn't initially use the pods and the iPads as much. I used the context boards more often and had the kids cut them out. What happened was as my kids got more comfortable and understood that it was really their words and their voice, they didn't want to tell my story, which was totally cool. I don't really want them to tell mine. I really want them to pick those photographs and tell their own. And if you have families that send in photos, ask for little descriptions and it makes it even better. It's super fantastic when you get those pictures from the families, the big events and things that they've done. So much meaning. And I did say that I you know, also spent time doing it over the summer. I'm going to show you my opinion right really fast, and then I want to go on to this next part because There were some really cool things that I still have, and I just realized what time it is. Goodness, Terry, when I get going and talk, I talk, don't I? Okay.
Good stuff though.
Here we go. I am really quick going to show you an opinion write. These were different. It was, you could do an opinion write on, do you like tacos or hamburgers? I like tacos. They are. Big one, they didn't want me to use because. And Dave Madison does a whole thing on opinion writing. We had just gotten there and we were focusing on the vocabulary around the idea of what we think in our head. And there's a whole opinion section. So we were working on labeling. I put a big thought bubble up on the wall behind me and we were talking about labeling different thoughts. And I don't have a picture of the chicken, but this is how fancy my drawings are, everybody. We had two different clucking. We had one chicken and one other animal, and they sang we had a duck that wore a hat and sang Singing in the Rain. And then we had a chicken that said, it's saying, whoops, there it is it laid an egg? It was one of our favorites to do. And we had to pick which one we liked better. So you see how I delineated, I changed the idea by making it a thought bubble. And this was my whole thing. So now this next one, this is an example of my communication board. All the different components. My nouns are going to be orange, my pronouns are yellow, action words are green, describing words are blue. You can pick your color coding method. I don't know that it really matters. We just had, as a group, agreed that that was the one that we were the most familiar with. And if you look at any and all different communication systems, they all kind of have their own. Most of the research now shows that it doesn't really matter. The color coding, it more helps grown-ups than it does the kids. Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow. I don't actually have that many slides left, just a lot of things I like to say. Okay, so here's the yellow book. I actually think I took that picture off of that building's website. How I teach the classroom staff. I believe in paras and the value they bring to the classroom. They have a rich level of experience. They have a tremendous love of these kids. They do a lot of hard work, and they add perspective and memory. Because I've been working with some of these folks for 10 years and they'll remind me of things we used to do and I'll go, oh, okay, yeah, I forgot about that. Let's try that. That I like to make sure that they're included in the process and they understand why. What I do is I take the benchmarks, and I'll show you guys those in just a minute, and I print them out. And we sit, and as a team, even if you just have 5 minutes to try and do it in, as a team, we sit and decide where we think each child is based on it. And I took some of the work for the benchmarks and how I decided it from Dave Madison's work, some of it from Lucy Calkins, and some of it just from me and how we did things in our classroom and what I felt was going to work and was important. It wasn't just me, it was me, the SLP, the OT, kind of talking about where our kids were and what next steps we felt would be appropriate for them. So we talk about it and we pick the spot where we think the kids are. And like I said, then that benchmark goes inside their yellow book with their card. The goals that they have in their IEP are written on it so that when you go for writing, you're making sure that you're hitting those goals while you're doing your narrative writing each week. I always model first. I'm the guinea pig. I get to start. I share the basics of how we do the lessons and why. And then we take turns writing with each kid so that you know how each child is doing. I don't stick with one child, although I did always do my buddy that had the fun run, because that was how I wanted to do it with him. But we all took turns, and then I would watch and I would give feedback on how it went. And if they had a question about something, they would come and ask me, sometimes in the minute and sometimes after, when I was going over stories. And like I said, IEP goals and how to keep it all organized. It does stay organized. It's going to open for me. Super. Okay, so these are the benchmarks. I am going to tell you this now, but I'm going to go back to it later. TPEP. In order to make your life work, if you're going to take on something like writing or a whole new literacy, thing for your classroom, make it your TPEP goal and do it on a year you're going comprehensive, because then you can really deep dive into it. I know SLPs and OTs don't, but if you have a teacher that is looking into doing it, it's great for the collaboration goal, because you're looking at, you're looking at a small group, you're looking at a whole group goal, and you're looking at how you can collaborate with others. And I could collaborate with parents and I could collaborate with paras that year. So here are my benchmarks. I've got the level of student participation, how we perceive it, the things that you're going to need, your teaching objectives beyond just what the IEP goals and objectives are, and then other activities or ideas. Because there was one evolution of writing in our class where we would have all the kids at the back at a table with a couple of staff working on the additional learning opportunities while just a couple of us kept kids for writing. So depending upon what your students can do and how you feel at the classroom, this was just a great way for us to have some additional ideas on working with the kids that would then, you know, aim them back towards what we want them, what skills we want them to develop for their writing. And there are 5 different levels of this. I just recently updated some of this. And if you look over here on this one, it's like the students should participate in reading of RAP, read, ask, answer, and prompt books, and engage in commentary or discussion with teachers. We're big in having kids comment on stories, not just answer comprehension questions, but actually tell us what they think. So we would have those. I love when they're starting to retell, looking at and exploring books. And this one was, I think when this was, that was my last one. And this was where I started for beginning and end. So things like an eraser, and the rainbow checklist is another something that I need to share. So the rainbow checklist is another thing that we developed years ago. We had kids that had gotten to the point where they were really quite strong writers. And we wanted them to have something that they could start to self-monitor, that they had all of the language that they needed for their story. So if you I wrote rainbow sentence goals, and this is an old one that got beat up, but I can write a rainbow, and they would then have to know that they had all of the different parts of the sentence. And I can tell you that even my OT could walk in, he'd pick up the book, he knew that this was her goal, and he had his markers so that as they were writing the words, they either underlined the word that met each of these categories, or they wrote the word in that color. And then the child got to make the check that they had each of the components to write a whole sentence using a core word, a describing word, an action, a noun, and a pronoun. So the beginnings of the kids doing some self-check on the work that they do. I'm talking really fast and nobody's asking any questions, so I'm just curious if anybody has any. Nope. Okay, I'll keep going. Okay. I said some of this already. I always take the time to help them understand the how and the why. The paras are phenomenal. I trust them. I work with them. I give them feedback. Not always what they want to hear, but it works. And it's a team effort. I don't like everything taught the same because the kids aren't going to generalize skill if it's all the same. And so I work really hard to make sure that everybody can do it a little bit their own way. And that gives some autonomy, and it shows a level of trust with your staff. If you don't trust your staff, there are some other things that I think you could probably work on. But I know that, and I know there are teachers out there that don't necessarily collaborate well. I want to learn from any and all people about how to do what I do and how to do it better, or add something I didn't know. I have a new SLP just this year, and she has been doing a phenomenal job of watching what we're doing because she's new to life skills and really trying to take it on. And it says that there's pattern chart writing, and I'll show you some of that in just a moment. That's where I learned new stuff this summer and got super excited. So like I said, comprehensive literacy for all. It's heavy material, but you guys should read it. It's phenomenal. I need to go back and read it again. If I wasn't so tired all the time, I probably would. But it made me look at what I wanted to add to my writing instruction, because it's literacy, it's reading, it's writing, it's all of those different components. And the book boxes were a big one. We got yoga mats and we cut them up and the kids got to decorate their book boxes. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been doing a book that's all about me. And it's based on our pattern chart writing and getting to know the kids this fall. What we started with was I am and our name, because like I said, we were learning to sequence the letters in our name and recognize our name. And so we decided to take it and turn it into a book, because then the kids can publish their own book. And I have this covered because this is one of the kids. And this is not, I did not create these. One of my paras, Jessica, did. And she's going into doing her student teaching in January. And these are some of the things that I'm gonna brag on for her that she's been doing, but she started putting this together and just took it and ran with it, and it's phenomenal. I have an example that's mine, but I kind of liked this one better. So the first page is just I am, and under here is his name, and we pull it all off and he can sequence it. These words all come off. What we started with chart paper on the wall, and the kids came up and they helped me write the sentence. And then we took that sentence that they wrote and we cut it apart, and they had to practice putting it in sequence on their desk. And they're still doing that. They actually are up to 5 sentences now, and they get the bag with all the sentences that they've created in it. And they practice going back and saying, I am so-and-so. And then the next page is how old they are. For some kids, this is blank and they have to write it all. For other kids, it's not. We also have tally marks and the number for each child so they can select the one that they want to do. They then got to tell us an activity that they like to do and a food that they like to do. They got to tell us their favorite color, and they get to sequence all of these. Note the favorite color is the same color as the book. They're as personalized as possible. This is our first attempt at self-publishing. My next goal with this, because they wrote these books, is our next books I want to build this way, but I also want to build electronically so that they can maybe publish them on Tar Heel. But we have one more page to put in our books, and it's about our family who lives in our house. And for each page, like on the name page here, we also have the PCS images. For some kids, we didn't put the PCS image, we just put the word, because some of our kids are more readers, and some are still reliant on those PCS symbols. We're trying to move away from using those all the time because we want them to develop the literacy skills. But that's where they are with that. I can't obviously publish these, but as soon as these books are done next week, they also get to come sit up in the author's chair and they get to read their story to their classmates. That's some pretty cool writing. All right, and let's see where we are. And I said this before, but TPEP. Use it. Take it and take something that's difficult and something that you really want to invest the time in and make it your sole focus for the year. Not your sole focus, but the thing you deep dive into. We're tired and there's a lot going on, but when you pick something as tremendous as, hey, I want to overhaul how I do writing in my classroom, pick how you want to do it and just make it your focus. Get your team on board, let them know your goals and how you want to track it, and do it as a group. Okay, that's where I am. Next steps, my kids were not necessarily ready for the virtual pencil a whole lot. I did promise I would show you one. So we're going to start doing more work around recognizing a virtual pencil and finding the meaning in it. Oh, I have one more thing I did say I was going to show you today. So the cool thing about the Comprehensive Literacy for All book study was the fact that it was not just teachers. It was SLPs and OTs and PTs and teachers and paras all taking it together. And the conversations were amazing. There was actually a whole group who wants to continue to meet over the course of the year, and they want to potentially do the course again next summer. We're not sure we can get clock hours for it a second time. But we designed a whole Canvas page, and we had weekly questions. Sari attended as a guest because SETC had done it too, but we invited her to join ours. And so we talked about, like, we built documents that we had each person access and add. We had self-reflection forms that we did. But then we went back and put all these notes together, and they're all in the Google Drive. So each group, each person that took it has access to this. And our last session was actually after school started. And after, we all cried about being tired and feeling frustrated, we started to share the things that we were working on. And it brought us back to some of the joy that we had felt over the summer and what we were aiming to do next. And I've fallen off on my word wall. That was my next goal. But after the break, I'm going to be excited to do my next steps. So that's where we are. What did I not show? Showed us communication board. I showed that. Anybody did miss anything, Sarah, you think? No?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, there's a question. What ages do you teach?
K through 5. I don't like having K, but I do. Virtual pencil, I have to show you that. Thank you, Susan. All of the grades. Do I agree with it? No. Do I do it? Yes. I'm finding my virtual pencil while I tell you this. We're supposed to be going back to a different model that is primary intermediate. I like it that way better. I don't think more than about 3 years with the same group is a good idea. Okay. This is one, and actually I built another resource last year in the Google Drive, and I shared it with all the life skills teachers, and I put another bunch of examples of my students' work, a communication board, a sample of the writing page, when I wasn't writing in the yellow book, and I put up the virtual pencil. Now I pulled up the lowercase one because after the book study this summer, I learned that I should probably be focusing on using lowercase more than uppercase with my students. And there were multiple reasons. But if you note, all the vowels go down one side and they are all yellow. That is to highlight them. I have this in multiple versions. I have it in upper and a lower. I have it in a flip book version where the kids can tear off the letters also. So we as a team agree on where we think they are. If they don't have a strong point, we do a tear off. And the first requirement for using the virtual pencil before you can tell me the letters is we're going to tell your name. We're going to write your name. So, you know, let's say it's, I'll just use Lucas's name because that's my son. I would then say, okay, it's time to put your name on your paper. And I wouldn't write it where I drew the person because you always label the person as me and always write in pencil. I would say, let's write your name. Let's find the first letter in your name, L. And then I would write it below the line. U is the next letter, write the U. And then I would go, okay, I'm all done. And that's why you have a yes and a no and a more to say. You have end, new words so they could tell you if they want a space. Do you have any letters you want? Do you have words you want to put below the line? Show me what they are. And then they can just point to the letters, and whatever letter they say, I would say it. Sometimes I would make the sound because, you know, you want to reinforce those skills the whole time. And then you're writing it. And like I told you with my guy in the fun run one, he thought it was so cool that he could make he's like, dance, Miss April, dance, write all the letters I want you to write. He thought it was great. I finally had to tell him, nope, I'm all done now, bud. All done writing the letters for today. And he was unhappy with me. But it was just so fantastic to see him do that. So, all right. Any other questions? Anything I missed? It's a lot in a short period of time. It seems overwhelming. There is another version of this webinar that I've done in the past. So if you have any questions, yeah, sorry.